Judge John Roberts screams at John Kennedy on live TV. John's cold response went viral. The air in the congressional hearing room was thick with anticipation, the kind that settles over a room when everyone knows something monumental is about to unfold. Rows of polished wooden desks gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the faint hum of cameras filled the space, broadcasting every moment to millions of viewers across the nation. The hearing was meant to be a routine examination of a recent Supreme Court ruling on public access to government records, a decision that had sparked heated debate for its potential to limit transparency. Few could have predicted that this session held in the heart of Washington, D.C. would become the stage for one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent memory. At the center of it all were two figures: Chief Justice John Roberts, the stoic and silver-haired leader of the Supreme Court, and Senator John Kennedy, the sharp-witted Republican from Louisiana, known for his folksy charm and unrelenting questioning. What happened next would not only shock the nation, but also set social media ablaze with hashtags like Kennedy Clapback trending worldwide within minutes. This was the moment when a single question ignited a firestorm, and a calm, calculated response changed the course of political discourse. The Supreme Court's ruling had stirred controversy from the moment it was announced. The decision, penned by Chief Justice Roberts himself, restricted public access to certain government databases, arguing that unchecked transparency could compromise national security and administrative efficiency. Critics, however, saw it as a dangerous step toward secrecy, one that could shield government agencies from accountability and leave citizens in the dark about decisions that affected their lives. The ruling had sparked protests from transparency advocates' editorials in major newspapers and heated discussions on cable news shows. It was the kind of decision that demanded scrutiny, and Congress had called for an emergency hearing to examine its implications. Senator John Kennedy, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, was among those tasked with questioning witnesses. Known for his plain-spoken style and ability to cut through bureaucratic jargon, Kennedy was expected to bring his signature blend of wit and tenacity to the proceedings. But no one, not the committee members, not the press, not even Kennedy himself, could have anticipated that Chief Justice Roberts would choose this moment to make a rare and dramatic appearance. Roberts's decision to attend the hearing was a shock in itself. Chief Justices of the Supreme Court rarely, if ever, testify before Congress to defend their rulings. The separation of powers, a cornerstone of American governance, typically keeps the judiciary at a distance from legislative grilling. Yet here was Roberts striding into the hearing room with the measured confidence of a man who had spent nearly 2 decades at the helm of the nation's highest court. His tailored suit and perfectly combed hair projected an image of unshakable authority, and his presence sent a clear message: the Supreme Court was under attack, and he was here to defend its honor. The room buzzed as he took his seat at the witness table, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp, scanning the committee members with the precision of a seasoned jurist. Across from him sat Senator Kennedy, his face betraying no hint of intimidation. Dressed in a simple navy suit, Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his hands folded casually as if preparing for a routine conversation. But those who knew him understood that behind his easygoing demeanor lay a mind as sharp as a tack, ready to dissect any argument with surgical precision. The hearing began with the usual formalities: opening statements, procedural remarks, and a brief overview of the ruling in question. Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, a staunch defender of institutional decorum, emphasized the need for respectful dialogue, a not-so-subtle reminder to treat the Chief Justice with the deference his position commanded. Roberts opened with a prepared statement, his voice steady and deliberate, defending the ruling as a necessary balance between transparency and security. He spoke of constitutional principles, judicial precedent, and the court's duty to protect the public interest. The room listened in respectful silence, though a few senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The ruling's critics, including Kennedy, saw it as a power grab by unelected officials, one that could erode public trust in government. As the floor opened for questions, the tension in the room began to build, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Kennedy was among the first to speak. His Louisiana drawl, warm and disarming, filled the room as he addressed Roberts directly. "Chief Justice, I appreciate you coming here today. Ain't often we get a Supreme Court justice in this room, so I reckon this must be important to you." The comment drew a few chuckles, but Roberts's face remained impassive. Kennedy continued, his tone polite but pointed. "Now, this ruling of yours, it's got folks worried. You're saying it's about protecting sensitive information, but a lot of people think it's about keeping 'em in the dark. Can you explain how blocking access to public records helps the average American trust their government?" The question was straightforward, but its implications were profound. It challenged the core of Roberts's argument, suggesting that the ruling prioritized institutional power over public accountability. The room leaned forward, sensing the first spark of confrontation. Roberts responded with his characteristic polish, reiterating the need for balance and citing legal precedents that supported the court's decision. But there was a slight edge to his voice, a hint of irritation that hadn't been there before. Kennedy nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the answer before pressing further. "With all due respect, Chief Justice, I'm not sure that answers the question. See, I've got folks back in Louisiana who rely on access to records to hold their officials accountable, whether it's a local sheriff or a federal agency. Your ruling makes that harder. How's that square with the idea that the government works for the people?" The question hit like a well-aimed dart, and for the first time Roberts's composure seemed to waver. His jaw tightened, and his fingers gripped the edge of the table. The cameras, ever present, zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Roberts, the man who had spent years cultivating an image of judicial restraint, snapped. His voice rose sharp and unsteady as he pointed a trembling finger at Kennedy. "Senator, you are clearly out of your depth discussing matters of constitutional law," he shouted, his face flushing a deep red. "This ruling was carefully considered by the highest court in the land, and I will not sit here and have it misrepresented by someone who doesn't understand the complexities of judicial interpretation." The room fell silent, stunned by the outburst. This was not the measured, scholarly Chief Justice the public knew. This was a man unraveling on live television, his carefully crafted facade cracking under the weight of a single question. The cameras whirred, and the press corps scrambled to capture every word. Committee members exchanged glances, some shocked, others barely concealing their excitement at the drama unfolding before them. Kennedy, however, didn't flinch. He sat calmly, his hands still folded, his expression one of mild surprise, as if he'd just been told the weather might turn rainy. The contrast between Roberts's fury and Kennedy's composure was stark, and it only amplified the moment's intensity. The senator waited a beat, letting the silence stretch before leaning forward to his microphone. "Chief Justice, I'm just a country lawyer from Louisiana, but I reckon I know a thing or two about asking questions," he said, his voice steady and laced with just a hint of humor. "And I'm pretty sure the folks watching at home are wondering the same thing I am. If this ruling's so good for the country, why is it so hard to explain it to us?" The room erupted in murmurs, and a few committee members couldn't suppress their smiles. It was a masterstroke, calm, direct, and devastatingly effective. Roberts's face grew even redder, his hands now visibly shaking as he struggled to regain control. The outburst was a turning point. Roberts tried to recover, launching into a heated defense of the court's independence and accusing Kennedy of politicizing a legal matter. But the damage was done. The Chief Justice's loss of composure was being broadcast live on C-SPAN CNN and countless streaming platforms, and within minutes, clips of his outburst were circulating online. Social media exploded with reactions, and the hashtag #KennedyClapback began trending as users shared videos of Kennedy's cool-headed response. Roberts's words, "out of your depth," were replayed endlessly, each repetition amplifying the perception that he had underestimated his opponent. Kennedy, meanwhile, continued his questioning, undeterred by the Chief Justice's anger. He asked about the practical impacts of the ruling, citing examples of citizens who had used public records to expose corruption or mismanagement. Each question was delivered with the same calm, deliberate tone, and each one seemed to deepen Roberts's frustration. As the hearing progressed, the dynamic between the two men became the focal point of the room. Roberts, clearly rattled, began to interrupt Kennedy, his voice growing sharper with each exchange. "Senator, you're twisting the court's intent." He snapped, at one point his tone bordering on desperation. Kennedy, unfazed, simply smiled and replied, "I'm not twisting anything, Chief Justice. I'm just trying to understand why this ruling seems to help the folks in power more than the folks at home." The simplicity of the response, paired with its undeniable logic, struck a chord with viewers. Commentators on live broadcasts began to note the contrast. Roberts, the embodiment of institutional authority, was losing his grip, while Kennedy, the unassuming senator, was emerging as a voice of reason. By the time Kennedy's allotted questioning time ended, the hearing room was buzzing with energy. Reporters were furiously typing, and the audience, both in the room and online, was captivated. Roberts sat back in his chair, his face still flushed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Kennedy, meanwhile, gathered his notes with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But something extraordinary had happened. In a matter of minutes, a routine congressional hearing had transformed into a defining moment in American politics. The image of Roberts shouting at Kennedy and Kennedy's unflappable response would dominate headlines and social media feeds for days to come. It was a clash not just of personalities, but of principles, the right to question authority versus the expectation of deference. And as the cameras continued to roll, one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. The congressional hearing room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the aftermath of Chief Justice John Roberts's unprecedented outburst. His face, still flushed from accusing Senator John Kennedy of being out of his depth, betrayed a man unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. The cameras, relentless in their focus, captured every tense moment, broadcasting to millions across the nation who were riveted by the unfolding drama. Senator Kennedy, seated across from Roberts, remained an island of calm amidst the storm. His hands folded, his expression one of quiet confidence. The Louisiana senator's folksy drawl and unassuming demeanor belied a mind honed for precision, and as he leaned toward his microphone, the room held its breath. What followed was not just a response, but a masterclass in holding power to account, a calculated, relentless dissection of Roberts's position that left the Chief Justice scrambling and the internet ablaze with #KennedyClapback. Kennedy's words, delivered with the steady cadence of a seasoned lawyer, turned a routine hearing into a defining moment, proving that a single voice armed with reason and resolve could shake the foundations of authority. Kennedy began with a deliberate pause, letting Roberts's harsh words, "out of your depth," hang in the air like a challenge he was more than ready to meet. "Chief Justice, I'm just a fella from Louisiana," he said, his voice warm but edged with steel, "and I may not have your fancy title, but I know a thing or two about asking questions that need answering." The room stirred, a ripple of anticipation spreading among the senator's aides and reporters. Kennedy's opening wasn't confrontational. It was disarming, inviting the audience to see him as a regular guy standing up for regular people. But beneath the folksy charm was a calculated strategy, one that would unravel Roberts's defense piece by piece. "Your ruling says it's about protecting sensitive information, and I get that," he continued, his tone measured. "But what I don't get is how making it harder for folks to know what their government's up to makes things better for 'em. Can you help me understand that?" The question was simple, direct, and devastatingly effective, cutting straight to the heart of the controversy over the Supreme Court's ruling on public access to government records. Roberts, still visibly unsettled, tried to regain control. "Senator, the court's decision balances transparency with the need to protect national interests," he said, his voice tight, as if reciting a memorized script. "Unfettered access to certain records could jeopardize critical operations." It was a standard judicial talking point, but it landed flat in the face of Kennedy's grounded approach. The senator nodded, as if considering the response, then leaned forward again. "I hear you, Chief Justice, but let's talk about the folks back home. There's a teacher in Monroe who used public records to find out her school district was misspending funds meant for her students. Took her months, but she got the truth. Your ruling makes that harder, maybe impossible. How's that balancing anything for her?" The question was a surgical strike, shifting the focus from abstract principles to the real-world impact on ordinary Americans. The room buzzed, and the cameras zoomed in, capturing Roberts's tightening jaw and Kennedy's unflinching gaze. What made Kennedy's approach so powerful was his ability to anchor every question in the lives of his constituents. He didn't engage in theoretical debates or get lost in legal jargon. He spoke for the people who felt the consequences of the court's decisions. "Let me give you another example," he said, his drawl softening just enough to pull the audience in. "There's a mechanic in Lafayette who found out his town was planning a highway project that'd wipe out his shop. He got that information from public records. Now your ruling says folks like him might not get that chance anymore. Can you tell me how that's fair?" Roberts shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the table as he launched into a defense of judicial precedent and constitutional limits. But Kennedy was ready. "I'm not asking about precedent, sir," he interjected, his voice firm but polite. "I'm asking about people, real people who need to know what their government's doing to them. Can you explain why your ruling helps those folks?" The room was electric, every word landing like a hammer blow, and social media was already lighting up with clips of Kennedy's relentless questioning. Roberts tried to pivot, arguing that state laws provided alternative avenues for accessing information. But Kennedy wasn't having it. "With all due respect, Chief Justice, those avenues you're talking about ain't exactly a smooth road," he said, his tone now carrying a hint of skepticism. "Most folks don't have the time, money, or lawyers to navigate that maze. Your ruling just added more roadblocks. So I'll ask again, how does that serve the public?" The question was a masterstroke, exposing the disconnect between the court's lofty rhetoric and the practical realities faced by everyday Americans. Roberts's response, a stumbling attempt to reiterate the need for security, only deepened the sense that he was out of touch. The cameras caught every moment, and online users were sharing snippets with captions like "Kennedy's asking the questions we all want answered," and "This is what standing up for us looks like." The hashtag Kennedy Clapback surged, trending globally, as millions watched the senator dismantle the Chief Justice's arguments with calm precision. Kennedy's final salvo was a question that left no room for evasion. "Chief Justice, let's be straight," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on Roberts. "Your ruling makes it easier for folks in power to keep secrets, and harder for folks like my constituents to hold them accountable. That don't sound like justice to me. Can you tell this room, tell the people watching at home, how that makes our country stronger?" The question was a knockout, simple yet profound, and it left Roberts visibly rattled. His response, a halting defense of the court's independence, sounded hollow, and the room knew it. Kennedy had exposed the ruling's flaws not by shouting or grandstanding, but by asking the questions that mattered most to the people he represented. The contrast between his composure and Roberts's earlier outburst was stark, and it resonated with viewers who saw in Kennedy a champion for accountability. As Kennedy yielded his time, the hearing room erupted in murmurs, with senators and aides exchanging glances of awe and disbelief. Reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing with breaking news alerts, and the internet was a frenzy of activity. Clips of Kennedy's questions were being shared at a staggering rate, with one video of his "just a country lawyer" line amassing millions of views in under an hour. The hashtag Kennedy Clapback was joined by others like "Hold them accountable," as Americans from all walks of life praised the senator's tenacity. A retiree in Florida tweeted, "Kennedy just showed us how to talk to power without blinking. Proud to see it." A student in California posted a TikTok saying, "This is why I'm gonna vote. Because people like Kennedy fight for us." The senator's performance had turned a policy debate into a cultural moment, one that would redefine how Americans thought about questioning authority. Kennedy's response wasn't just a win in the hearing room, it was a spark that ignited a broader conversation. His ability to stay calm under pressure, to ask simple yet piercing questions, and to focus on the human cost of the court's ruling had resonated deeply. As he gathered his notes and adjusted his glasses, Kennedy looked like a man who knew he'd done his job not for fame or glory, but for the people who trusted. The congressional hearing room had barely settled from the electrifying clash between Chief Justice John Roberts and Senator John Kennedy when the ripple effects began to spread like wildfire. As the gavel fell, signaling a brief recess, the hum of excitement among the attendees morphed into a roar across the digital landscape. Millions of viewers, from small-town diners to urban apartments, were already dissecting the confrontation on their phones, laptops, and TVs. Clips of Roberts's red-faced outburst and Kennedy's cool, calculated responses were being shared at a dizzying pace, with hashtag Kennedy Clapback dominating social media platforms within minutes. The nation was captivated not just by the drama of a Supreme Court Chief Justice losing his composure on live television, but by the broader questions it raised about accountability, transparency, and the role of those in power. What had started as a routine hearing about a controversial ruling on public access to government records had become a cultural touchstone, a moment that would define public discourse for weeks to come. The aftermath was swift, far-reaching, and revealed a nation hungry for leaders who could challenge authority with reason and resolve. The internet moved first, as it always does. Within an hour of the hearing's most heated exchange, the hashtag Kennedy Clapback had amassed over 1 million posts on X, with users sharing snippets of Kennedy's incisive questions and Roberts's unraveling demeanor. One viral clip showing Roberts shouting out of your depth, while Kennedy responded with a calm, "I'm just a country lawyer," was viewed millions of times across platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Memes flooded the feeds. One showed Kennedy's face superimposed on a chess master with the caption, "Checkmate in 3 moves." Another juxtaposed Roberts' flushed face with a cartoon of an erupting volcano labeled, "When you can't answer a simple question." Ordinary Americans, from teachers to truck drivers, posted their reactions, many praising Kennedy, for speaking to the frustrations of those who felt ignored by the powerful. A small business owner from Shreveport tweeted Kennedy just said, "What we're all thinking. Why is it so hard to know what our government's doing?" Thank you, Senator. The post racked up thousands of likes, reflecting a groundswell of support for Kennedy's straightforward approach. Mainstream media was quick to jump on the story, with cable news networks running the clips on a loop. CNN's headline read, "Chief Justice Roberts' outburst shocks nation. Kennedy steals the show." MSNBC commentators lauded Kennedy's composure, with one anchor noting, "This was a masterclass in how to hold power accountable without losing your cool." Even conservative outlets, typically protective of institutional figures like Roberts, struggled to defend the Chief Justice's behavior. A Fox News panelist admitted Roberts didn't do himself any favors today. Kennedy asked fair questions, and the Chief Justice looked like he couldn't handle the heat. The story wasn't just domestic. International outlets picked it up too, with the BBC running a segment titled U.S. Chief Justice's Meltdown Sparks Global Debate on Judicial Conduct. The global attention underscored the rarity of the moment. A Supreme Court Chief Justice, the epitome of judicial restraint, had been caught in a public display of frustration that called his impartiality into question. Political figures across the spectrum weighed in, revealing the deep divisions in how Americans viewed the confrontation. Progressive senators praised Kennedy for exposing the disconnect between the Supreme Court's rulings and the needs of everyday people. One tweeted, "Senator Kennedy just showed us what it looks like to demand answers from those who think they're untouchable. This is why we need oversight." Meanwhile, conservative lawmakers were split. Some aligned with the establishment, called for civility, and urged both sides to move forward, wary of undermining the court's authority. Others, sensing an opportunity to critique Roberts' leadership, rallied behind Kennedy. A prominent conservative commentator posted on X, "Roberts has been hiding behind his robe for years." Kennedy just pulled back the curtain. The bipartisan support for Kennedy was unexpected, reflecting a rare moment of unity around the idea that no one, not even a Chief Justice, should be above scrutiny. The legal community's response was particularly sharp. The American Bar Association issued a statement expressing concern over Roberts' uncharacteristic lapse in decorum, a diplomatic way of saying he'd embarrassed himself on a global stage. Legal scholars, usually cautious in their critiques, were more direct. A professor from Yale Law School tweeted, "Roberts' outburst undermines the court's credibility at a time when public trust is already fragile." Kennedy's questions were fair and necessary. Law schools across the country began incorporating the exchange into their curricula, using it as a case study in judicial temperament and congressional oversight. Even retired judges weighed in, with one former federal judge writing in an op-ed, "The Chief Justice's behavior was a disservice to the judiciary." Senator Kennedy, by contrast, demonstrated the kind of restraint we expect from those in public service. The consensus was clear. Roberts' loss of composure had damaged his reputation, while Kennedy's performance had elevated his. The public's reaction was just as telling. Across the country, people gathered in coffee shops, workplaces, and living rooms to discuss what they'd seen. A community college student in Ohio posted a viral TikTok saying, "I've never cared about politics before, but watching Kennedy stay calm while that judge yelled, 'That's what I want in a leader. Someone who fights for us without losing their head.'" A retired veteran in Texas shared a Facebook post that read, "I don't always agree with Kennedy, but he stood up for the little guy today." Roberts looked like he forgot who he works for. The sentiment was echoed in countless comments and posts, with many Americans expressing a renewed sense of connection to their government. Kennedy's ability to articulate their frustrations about a system that often seemed to prioritize the powerful over the people resonated deeply. The economic impact was immediate and surprising. Kennedy's Senate campaign saw a surge in donations, with thousands of small-dollar contributions pouring in from first-time donors inspired by his performance. His team reported raising over $1 million in the 48 hours following the hearing, a testament to the public's enthusiasm. Meanwhile, advocacy groups for government transparency seized the moment, launching campaigns to push for reforms that would protect public access to records. One nonprofit reported a 200% increase in memberships with their website, crashing from the influx of traffic. The hearing had galvanized a movement, with citizens demanding greater accountability from their institutions. Even businesses took notice, with some corporate leaders quietly discussing how to incorporate Kennedy moments into their training moments, when employees could respectfully challenge leadership with facts and preparation. The Supreme Court itself felt the tremors. Sources close to the court revealed that several justices were privately dismayed by Roberts' behavior, with one reportedly saying it had set back the court's reputation by years. The ruling on public records, already controversial, faced renewed scrutiny, with legal analysts questioning whether Roberts' emotional display suggested a deeper bias in his judicial philosophy. Civil liberties organizations announced plans to file motions challenging the ruling's implementation, citing the Chief Justice's conduct as evidence of potential prejudice. Public trust in the court, already at historic lows, took another hit, with polls showing a significant drop in confidence following the hearing. The incident had exposed a vulnerability in the court's armor, and Kennedy's questions had given voice to a growing sentiment that the judiciary was not above accountability. As the day drew to a close, the hearing room emptied, but the conversation was just beginning. News outlets continued their coverage, with analysts dissecting every word, gesture, and facial expression. Social media platforms buzzed with debates, not just about the ruling, but about the broader dynamics of power and privilege in American institutions. Kennedy, who had walked into the hearing as a well-known but not particularly flashy senator, emerged as a national figure, his name now synonymous with standing up to authority. Roberts, meanwhile, faced a barrage of criticism, with calls for an apology growing louder by the hour. The contrast between the two men, one calm and focused, the other unraveling under pressure, had captured the nation's attention, and the fallout was far from over. What had happened in that hearing room was more than a clash of personalities. It was a moment that forced America to confront uncomfortable questions about who holds power, who gets to question it, and what happens when those in charge can't handle the scrutiny. The echoes of the explosive congressional hearing between Chief Justice John Roberts and Senator John Kennedy reverberated far beyond the walls of the Capitol, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's consciousness. The viral clips of Roberts' outburst and Kennedy's unflappable responses had become more than just a moment of political theater. They had sparked a movement, igniting conversations about accountability, respect, and the power of asking tough questions. As the dust settled, the incident became a case study in how a single exchange could reshape public perceptions and inspire action. Senator Kennedy, with his calm, relentless pursuit of answers, had shown what it meant to hold power to account, while Roberts' loss of composure revealed the fragility of unchecked authority. This final chapter explores the lasting impact of that day, the lessons it imparted, and the call to action it inspired for everyday Americans to engage with their democracy. Above all, it underscores a timeless truth. In a society built on fairness, no one is above scrutiny, and everyone has a role to play in demanding transparency and justice. The aftermath of the hearing wasn't just about hashtags and headlines. It was about a fundamental shift in how people viewed their relationship with those in power. Across the country, classrooms, workplaces, and community centers buzzed with discussions about what had happened. Teachers used the hearing as a teaching tool, showing students how Kennedy's preparation and composure turned a heated moment into a lesson in civic responsibility. In a high school civics class in Louisiana, a teacher played the clip of Kennedy's now iconic line, "I'm just a country lawyer, but I reckon I know a thing or two about asking questions," and asked her students to write essays about why questioning authority matters. One student wrote, "Senator Kennedy didn't yell or get mad. He just kept asking until the truth came out. That's what I want to do when I grow up, ask the right questions." The sentiment was echoed in workplaces where employees began citing the Kennedy approach in meetings, using calm, fact-based challenges to push back against unclear decisions by their bosses. The incident had become a cultural shorthand for standing up with dignity and resolve. The legal community, too, felt the impact. Law schools incorporated the exchange into courses on judicial ethics, using it to illustrate the importance of temperament in public service. A professor at Georgetown Law remarked, "Kennedy showed us that you don't need to be a legal scholar to ask questions that matter. You just need to care about the people affected by those decisions." The hearing also prompted a broader reckoning within the judiciary. Legal organizations began advocating for mandatory training on handling public scrutiny, with the Federal Judicial Center announcing new workshops for judges on maintaining professionalism under pressure. The incident had exposed a vulnerability in the system. When those at the top couldn't handle tough questions, it eroded trust in the institutions they represented. Kennedy's performance, by contrast, became a model for how to engage with authority firmly, respectfully, and with an unwavering focus on the public good. For ordinary Americans, the hearing was a wake-up call. Community groups, from neighborhood associations to advocacy organizations, began hosting forums to discuss government transparency. In cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge, citizens organized Know Your Rights workshops, teaching people how to access public records despite the Supreme Court's ruling. One organizer, a librarian from Shreveport, said, "Kennedy reminded us that we don't have to sit back and accept what we're told. We can ask questions and we can demand answers." The surge in civic engagement was remarkable, with voter registration drives reporting increased participation, particularly among younger Americans, inspired by Kennedy's example. A college student in Texas posted on social media, "I always thought politics was for other people. But watching Kennedy take on the Chief Justice made me realize I can get involved too." Her post, liked thousands of times, captured a growing sentiment. The hearing had empowered people to see themselves as active participants in their democracy. The most profound lesson from the confrontation was about the power of preparation and composure. Kennedy's ability to stay calm while Roberts unraveled wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of how to navigate conflict with integrity. In a world often dominated by shouting matches and sound bites, Kennedy's approach offered a different path, one where facts, persistence, and respect could cut through even the most entrenched defenses. This lesson resonated in unexpected places. Corporate trainers began using the hearing as a case study in leadership and emphasizing how Kennedy's measured tone and clear questions disarmed his opponent without resorting to personal attacks. A business consultant in Chicago wrote in a blog post, "Kennedy's performance is a blueprint for how to challenge authority without losing your cool. It's about being prepared and staying focused on what matters." Even religious communities found inspiration, with a pastor in Louisiana preaching a sermon about speaking truth with grace, citing Kennedy as an example of standing firm without stooping to anger. The educational value of the incident lay in its call to action. Every person has the right and the responsibility to question those in power. Kennedy's questions weren't just about a single Supreme Court ruling. They were about ensuring that the system works for everyone, not just the privileged few. This message hit home for millions, particularly those who felt marginalized or ignored by the institutions meant to serve them. A single mother in Mississippi, inspired by the hearing, wrote a letter to her local newspaper saying, "I've always felt like the government doesn't care about people like me. But Senator Kennedy showed me that one person asking the right questions can make a difference." Her letter, reprinted across social media, became a rallying cry for others to get involved, whether by attending town halls, writing to their representatives, or simply voting in local elections. The hearing also sparked a broader conversation about the role of respect in public discourse. Kennedy's refusal to match Roberts's anger didn't just win him the exchange. It set a standard for how to engage in tough conversations without losing sight of civility. In a time when political debates often devolved into personal attacks, Kennedy's approach was a reminder that strength doesn't require shouting. Community leaders began organizing civil discourse workshops, encouraging people to emulate Kennedy's balance of firmness and respect. One facilitator in Atlanta said, "We're teaching people to ask hard questions like Kennedy did, but to do it in a way that keeps the conversation productive. That's how we build a better society." The workshops, held in libraries and community centers, drew diverse crowds from students to retirees, all eager to learn how to engage with their leaders more effectively. Ultimately, the lesson of the Kennedy-Roberts confrontation was clear. Democracy thrives when people are willing to ask tough questions and demand clear answers. Kennedy's performance showed that you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to make an impact, you just need to be the most prepared. His example inspired a generation to see themselves as agents of change, capable of holding even the most powerful figures accountable. For those who watched the hearing, whether live or in the countless viral clips that followed, the message was unmistakable. Your voice matters, and your questions can shape the future. The call to action was simple but profound. Get informed, speak up, and never let intimidation silence you. As Kennedy himself said in a press conference days later, "Folks, democracy ain't a spectator sport. You gotta show up, ask questions, and keep asking until you get answers that make sense." His words, shared millions of times online, became a mantra for a nation ready to demand more from those in power.